Good evening and thank you for tuning into the documentary channel.
You're watching Dockers on the Hour with Dave. New at 7 tonight, we will be looking at a documentary about the relationship between South Africa and Australia and where it is headed in the future. Hello and welcome to the show where we discuss relations between nations. I am your host, Jaime Painter. Tonight, we will be looking at the relationship between Australia and South Africa. Tonight's topic will be broken down into 5 main sections. Major events involving the two countries, the social, the economic, and the political sides of this relationship, and lastly, predictions for the future of this relationship and where it is headed. Australia and South Africa were, and still to this day are, part of the British Commonwealth. As a result of this, their relationship dates back over 100 years. From 1899 until 1902, 19,463 Australians were enlisted to fight in the South African Boer War under the British Commonwealth. During the First and Second World Wars, the two countries fought together with the Allies, under the British Commonwealth as well. These 3 wars created strong ties between Australia and South Africa that are still here to this day. Also, since the beginning of the 1930s, Australia and South Africa have been competing together in the highly competitive Commonwealth Games. Australia is a very popular destination for South African travel and immigration. South Africa is also a very popular destination for Australian travel and immigration. During 2007, 115,000 South African expatriates were living in Australia and 7,500 Australians in South Africa. Though there is a significant difference between these figures, with almost 15 times the South Africans living in Australia than vice versa, far more Australians travel to South Africa than immigrate there. So why are so many South Africans immigrating to Australia? Australian and South African culture are similar in many ways, so this makes the transition much easier. Australia is also a much safer place to live in than South Africa and has a much more reliable infrastructure and economy. Its GDP, GDP per capita, and GDP growth are much higher than South Africa's, and unemployment rate much lower. At the moment, Australia needs skilled migrants more than ever before and offers a skilled migration visa, attracting scores of South Africans. This visa allows immigrants to get permanent residence if their job is on the list of occupations Australia is interested in. Australia and South Africa have a long-standing, very competitive, and not always friendly sporting relationship. The rivalry between these two countries in cricket and rugby union is famous all over the world. In cricket, they have been competing against each other in one-day internationals since 1991. Though Australia did start competing in ODIs 20 years before this, during the 1970s and 1980s, there was an international sport ban on South Africa to encourage the abolition of apartheid. Overall, the social relationship between Australia and South Africa is possibly the most important factor as it concerns migration, a very costly and political affair affecting all 3 aspects of a relationship. To make this section a little more manageable, it'll be divided into 3 subsections: organizations, agreements, and sanctions. During the 1970s and 80s, as campaigns for international isolation of South Africa intensified, successive Australian governments placed Australia firmly in the anti-apartheid camp. Supporting the UN, Australia participated in bans against oil, trade, arms, and even a sport boycott on South Africa. During the apartheid years, links did diminish between the two countries, but since majority rule in 1994, all kinds of contact has increased. Bilateral agreements are in force covering defence information, extradition, air services, double taxation, and Science and Technology Corporation. Also, under the Australia-South Africa Climate Change Partnership, Both countries are working together on a range of projects related to climate change. Australia and South Africa have a history of cooperation across a range of issues, notably in the Commonwealth, the World Trade Organization, the Cairns Group, South Africa is the only African member, the New World Wine Producers Group, human rights, climate change, fisheries protection, the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, the Kimberley Process on Conflict Diamonds, migration and people smuggling, law enforcement, defence relations and customs cooperation. Overall, Australia's political relationship is moderately strong, though not as strong as that of their economic or political one. South Africa is by far Australia's largest and most dynamic trading partner in Africa. In 2007, our two-way merchandise trade was valued at $3.88 billion. This section will be divided into three subsections: imports and exports, investment, and growth of trade. South Africa is Australia's 16th most important export destination and its 24th most important source of imports. Australia is also South Africa's 16th most important export destination, but its 15th most important source of imports. In 2007, Australian exports to South Africa were $2.53 billion and were mainly meat, medicaments, and engineering equipment. Australian imports from South Africa were valued at $1.35 billion and were mainly passenger motor vehicles, pig iron, and motor vehicle parts. South Africa dominates African investment into Australia. Since the abolition of apartheid, two-way investment flows between Australia and South Africa have expanded, and, at the end of 2007, investment from South Africa into Australia amounted to $1.2 billion. Although Australian investment into South Africa is smaller, only $893 million, its investment into South Africa's mining sector is steadily increasing. Agriculture, infrastructure, and services are also attracting Australian investment, though to a much smaller degree. According to economists Andre Jordan and Ad Hodgkinson, over the past 5 years, total trade between South Africa and Australia grew by approximately 10% per year. This growth rate is higher than that of Australian trade with Thailand, the United Arab Emirates, and Singapore. Mr. Jordan and Ms. Hodgkinson also state that the rapid growth in bilateral trade indicates that trade-creating benefits should increase in the future. Overall, Australia's economic relationship with South Africa is a very dynamic partnership that is beneficial to both parties and one that's getting closer by the day. In conclusion, the bilateral relationship between Australia and South Africa is strongly based around social factors, especially around the areas of migration and sport. This relationship will only continue to strengthen in future years.